Hi, this is Anthony, parent for IRS Medic. It was about 11 years ago today that the IRS OVDI program was closing, and people with amazing amounts of undisclosures to perform were calling, wondering what to do. There's a lot of things going on right now, and that OVDI storm hit hard. And during that time, $10 billion was collected by the government, and the process has been awful. It's been utterly awful. Those people who were the first to disclose got treated the worst, and they're currently being treated the worst. And we'll have some upcoming content on one case in particular where the IRS is seeking to seize someone's house because they didn't file a form. And we'll be discussing that. But this is the thing you need to know right now. With the IRS poised to get 87,000 new employees. Folks, they learned their mistake from 2011. Joining me to discuss this entirely terrible process and this nightmare, this OVDI thing that the IRS did and is doing, and is making a focus of their future compliance and what they'll be doing to all of us who dare have an account overseas or dare live overseas. Well, with me is John Richardson today. He's been at the forefront of this battle. He is an attorney in Canada, and his clientele have some of the most interesting problems, all created by a government that's way out of control. And also with me is Keith Redmond, our long guest, who is our layman, who tells us the facts on the ground to make sure that what John and I are talking about makes sense and reflects a reality. Gentlemen, good morning to you today. Let's talk about this OVDI program. John, do you remember September 2011? What was going on in your mind? Do you remember that?
Well, I remember Labor Day weekend of 2011, and it was coming off a particularly brutal month of August where, just everyday garden variety U.S. citizens living outside the United States were simply going out of their minds in fear and anxiety and trying to decide whether to, actually enter this 2011 Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Initiative, OVDI. And for many of them, what was so extraordinary about it was that it would result in essentially their donating a high percentage of their net worth to the U.S. Treasury because they, like today, had no idea, what the U.S. compliance requirements were that applied to them. I mean, it was simply unbelievable. The fear, the terror, and I remember it was supposed to come to an end. I think the 1st of September. I think was the date that happened to be. It may have been the Friday of the Labor Day weekend in 2011. And then what happened was there was this hurricane at that time, and you can always count on the IRS to be reasonable. So what they did was they extended the misery, I think, for another 9 or 10 days. Giving people another 9 or 10 days to suffer whether to enter that particular program. Now, fortunately, gradually, I think people understood that it was, to enter the program was sort of like committing suicide to avoid dying. And
Yeah.
and eventually that program, I think it lasted until 2018, and then it was discontinued, but it was largely replaced by variations of the streamlined program. And of course, the streamlined compliance program is still in existence. But what's interesting, Anthony, is that here we are, it's Labor Day weekend 2022, 11 years later, and I think the same storm clouds are rising again because, you may recall leading up to the offshore voluntary disclosure programs, there was all this talk about American tax evasion and Swiss banks. And, now we're back to the Senate Finance Committee just published a report on sort of the combination of FATCA and tax evasion and talking about tax fraud again. We have the whole FBAR problem has escalated significantly. I read about a Treasury report saying the last 10 years they've assessed over $1.5 billion of FBAR penalties. The whole issue of FBAR is now being heard by the Supreme Court on the issue of, this isn't Bittner, whether it's penalties can be, these are, by the way, civil penalties, okay, whether they can be levied per account or whether they're restricted to the form itself. We have an interesting cert petition in this Toth case asking the Supreme Court to decide whether the constitutional prohibition on unreasonable fines applies to FBAR, with the government position, of course, oh God, no. I mean, we don't have FBAR fines. We have penalties. You know, that's an entirely different thing. How in God's name could there be any constitutional restriction whatsoever on the government's ability to impose FBAR penalties? And in fact, if you look at the Solicitor General's last paragraph of the brief on the Bittner cert petition, you'll see that the government's justification is that, by God, they want to impose the full force of the U.S. Department of Justice on anybody they want, anytime, any day of the week. So, you know, Anthony, we've got some serious problems here. We've got some serious injustice.
Well, yeah, and I think that in this takes me back to 2011, and I remember going over a lot of clients deciding what to do because there was actually a deadline. There was no program after this. So if you missed this deadline, okay, what were you going to do? And we also had clients that missed the earlier deadline in 2009 that were hanging out in no man's land. Well, the IRS, after sitting on the file for 2 years, said, oh, okay, we're going to process this per the 2011 OVDI program, the ones that were in there. Now, I remember this so many times. I would talk to people because this is what the assumption the IRS had was that everybody overseas had no legitimate purpose for it. Everyone's evading taxes. That's what the assumption is. Reality is none of that. But and so we were getting people who didn't disclose, and they're like, look, I really didn't do anything wrong. It really seems stupid for me to give up everything just because I didn't really make that big of a mistake. And then you have other people falling on the swords, people who tend to be perfectionists, who are like, oh my God, I did one thing wrong. Let me kill myself and give the IRS all my money. And now that's certainly something there, and they'll let you do that. What was going on at the time was that you had this really terrible program, and then you had this slightly less terrible one they were creating for people with some sort of thing that never really applied at the same point. There was this like streamlined program that didn't apply to anything. So we never used it.
Well,
so
Anthony, the first version of the streamline,
right.
Applied
the first version was useless. We didn't have one client.
It was 2014, and you know, frankly, I think that generally speaking, at least insofar as we're talking about the streamlined offshore program, not so much the domestic one, but the offshore program clearly provides opportunities for Americans abroad to come into compliance penalty free.
Which kind of makes you now worry, because at the time the IRS was putting out press releases, and I am sure I'll have to have content from then 11 years ago on this channel about don't do a soft disclosure, because that's what people were talking about at the time. Like, hey, don't go through the IRS program, just file your old returns and just pay the check this way and cross and hope they don't catch you, because the IRS is like, we're going to catch 10,000. We've caught 10,000 people that made soft disclosures, and we're going to come back with them with the worst FBAR penalties. You will see those press releases. Now, what happened? That never happened. Now, the IRS wrote a big check in what they promised. What they found out along the way was that these were hard. Assessing foreign penalties is not something your average examiner can do on their own. So rather, what the IRS has done, and we have seen these come up, is they are training their examiners, because they know they messed up. They know we threatened to go after these 10,000 people and we couldn't get them. Well, we're going to get them now. And they certainly have 10,000 people to go after. And now this is the way the IRS works. If you're familiar with you know, if you have to train a staff of people to do something, you have training programs. Well, your training program is going to tell you how to get a result. And your result is how to get a penalty. Your training program is not called Let's Be Fair and Reasonable. Your training program is maximizing return of investment on your time, examiner, so that a little bit of effort, you can get a massive penalty. That's what the trainings are called. That's what they are. So that is the thing that is happening. And that we're going to have more of these agents doing more and more terrible things. And this is the other thing. And here's something else going on culturally at the IRS. And this is something that I've noticed, is that there used to be intelligence, very thoughtful people at the IRS for the most part. Now those people are the exception. Anyone smart and intelligent is completely the exception at the IRS. The culture has changed. Young hires get on, they don't know right from wrong. They have no idea of any morality. They're raised in our public schools and they go to colleges. And to be an IRS revenue officer doesn't require an accounting degree. It requires any degree. Any degree, you could be a revenue officer to go into someone's and rattle their cages for anything. This is where the IRS, all these, John, this is what I'm saying, like warning signs beyond is where I'm at, based on their failures that they had in their past, how they addressed those failures, and now their new staff to completely obliterate us. I mean, it's going crazy.
Well, Anthony, there's no doubt that, it's interesting because on the issue of the increase in IRS agents, I think it's a bad idea to analyze this in the extremes. We have, it's typically breaking down under party lines where the Democrats are saying, oh, no, this will have no effect on Americans abroad. And we have, certain other people taking other extremes. There will be an IRS agent on every doorstep. Both of these are wrong. But I think that it is an indisputable fact that the more resources the IRS has at its disposal for enforcement, the more likely that this is going to start impacting Americans abroad, at least the ones who are in the tax system. I think there's no question.
Honestly, you keep discussing Americans abroad, and I got to tell you, I don't have any sympathy for them. I have very little sympathy for Americans abroad because as a group, these people tend to vote for the very thing that is killing them, and people who don't want to be wrapped up in their nonsense. These
that's true.
People who say, yes, this is great. This is great. You should be, any American overseas should be fire breathing and want to hang by the neck until dead anyone who wants to restrict their liberty. Yeah. Anyone who wants you to renounce your citizenship so you could live, that is somebody who I think is a candidate for a little bit of a adjustment. That is where we should be, not voting for these people as if, well, somebody else that's worse. There's an orange man out there that's worse. Okay, that's fine, but you have just voted yourself for your own doom. Yeah, which I have to be okay with, but you're going to call me, complain, oh, Anthony, the stupid thing I voted for is hurting me. And okay, all right, let's go. And then you're going to pay me and you're going to make the same stupid donations you do every year to the same stupid idiots, because I see it on your tax returns.
I have to concur.
Cause your room.
I have to concur, Anthony, because in my group, American Expatriates, I can't tell you the number of comments that say, well, no, even if there's more IRS agents, they're not going to come after Americans abroad. That's not what their purpose is for. And I'm like, where are you coming from? What land are you living in?
Yeah. Well, that just shows the disconnect. And I think that's just the power of the propaganda that, people believe that they should really, that our government should be doing everything. And I think that's the conceit. The conceit is that our tax system can handle everything, including all our social, our health problems and everything. And that's been the lie that's promoted for 113 years now, 109 years, 107 years, whatever, since 1913. I think that's the thing is like, if every expat who voted for this could get what they deserve, I'd be okay. Unfortunately, and especially the people watching this channel, they're the expats. They're the people who aren't like that. They're saying, yeah, no, this isn't right at all. What's going on? And so that's really the issue, which always gets me back to what we were talking about before on consent, and no one's consenting to this. But let's move on. All right, so go ahead, John.
And Keith, I mean, I all these years I've been involved in this, and it's
Yeah.
really getting hard to not reach the conclusion that, generally speaking, U.S. citizens living outside the United States are really okay with citizenship taxation. They're really okay with it. They won't oppose it particularly. I mean, they may make the odd offhand comment, but they will not, uh, voice their opposition. They
You know
will not
why?
generally support, those who are trying to get it changed. So, I mean, you really wonder. And, I had this, as you know, I pride myself in my simple mindedness. Um, but, here's a very simple minded observation, okay? And it's this. So you look at what's going on social media, like take Keith's group, for example, that has something like 8,000 members. Well, these expat tax groups will have 35,000, 40,000 members, right?
Right.
I mean, good God. I mean, they're clearly more interested in tax compliance than getting the laws changed.
They love
And
it.
even in
Yeah.
Keith's group, I mean, I don't participate in these things, but, at least 50% of the discussion, focuses, I mean, it really isn't particularly critical of these requirements for citizenship taxation. I mean, they may sort of complain about a little bit, but I mean, they're not going to do anything to, oppose it particularly. And then we have in the context, we have Democrats abroad on all their chapters out trolling for votes every day. I mean, it is absolutely mind-boggling to me that, given that the Democratic Party owns FATCA, and given that the Democratic Party is the party, the administration, that outside of the law, by using the offshore voluntary disclosure programs and levying all these penalties, this is the party that has, in fact, gone after Americans abroad outside of the law. But still, people say, "Whoa, where do I sign up to vote for more of it?" Right? I mean,
Right.
there's something very, very odd going on here.
It
Well,
is
I
very
I don't
strange.
understand
It
Well, I
is.
could explain it because these Americans over abroad, they perceive themselves more as global citizens. They're global citizens, which is different than being an American. A global citizen is somebody who is for global homogenization. If you're for global homogenization, you're for a tax sharing of everything. You're all about knowing nothing. You're all about the Great Reset. That's what globalists do. And we all know that's just the whole lie of everything. And so that's where we get into it. They actually don't see themselves. And I think it's a complete failure of, I mean, they are people who should be stopping this. And they're the ones encouraging it and I think it's just that they're such cult members that and it's really like this. As someone who's been involved in tax for years, and I would see people get these tax problems and like, why are you doing this? It's actually isn't that hard. It's like, you want to have it. You want to have this problem. And look, I've analyzed a lot of people over the years, and you know what I've concluded is that a lot of people, they need this stress. They need to be wrapped up tight with this stress, because if that stress goes away, there's no them. And so by being an American overseas, where your country that you love, you think they're great, but you're caught up by, if only Stalin knew, right? I mean, the people up in the gulags, they really thought that. They really, if Stalin knew that I was up here, he would come and get me back. I got to write a letter to Joseph Stalin and say, come get me. They sent me away. It's that sort of thing. These are people who are in a gulag and they're praising their prisoner. And that's just sort of how deep it is. And hopefully some people, maybe one or two people are awakening to say, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. But that's where I'm at.
I think there's another element that's going on here. You have a lot of Americans overseas who act as if they live in the United States, and they focus on the issues in the United States, and they will not put as priority changing any of these laws, or I can call them laws, any of these regulations or whatever that are adversely affecting them. Right. Every time I always get, well, there's more issues that are more important today to deal with it. This has been going on since the FATCA has come in.
Yeah.
There's always going to be more important issues, and nobody's going to stand up for Americans overseas except Americans overseas. Homeland Americans are not going to do it. And if you
Well,
keep on
right.
voting for people who are screwing, you keep voting for people who are going to screw you. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I don't know if it's a Stockholm syndrome thing. I don't know. It's bizarre.
It's well, I mean, we can't go into all the reasons right now.
No,
But
but
you, but yeah,
it
absolutely. I
is.
mean,
It's a fact.
and I
Like I'm
think the
saying.
thing is that I think what we're hearing today is that, and I think really just a lot of frustration on my part that I thought there was a whole group of people that we could sort of, hey, get on board the whole, the tax code is problematic for just not expats, but for everybody. Hey, if you have, like,
Yeah.
that's what I thought was going to happen. Hey, let's get this group together here and we'll go. But actually, what you get is a bizarre self-abuse ritual. I mean, that's what you have.
You know, it
People
makes
who
you wonder, and it'd be interesting, each of your thoughts on these questions. You wonder why, there's so little opposition to this. I mean, is it because filling out these forms gives them something to do?
yes,
It makes them
Or they feel
makes them
patriotic by
important.
doing it.
more
They feel
formal,
Yes.
have them
patriotic.
more
Yeah.
purposeful their life. I mean, do you think it could be that?
There is a certain group of people in this world who are trained to be perfect by their parents. And if they fail anyone, they fall apart. These people have to do everything right. They have to get A pluses. If they don't get an A plus, they're like this. And so if there's a form that needs to be filled out, they actually, that drama is a tension and release that's cathartic. It's just reliving their entire thing. And so it's like, you know what? Instead of like messing with all of us who are trying to live this world, people, maybe you need to talk to a therapist. Instead of trying to do your therapy through this tax code, maybe work on your mommy and daddy issues another way that's a little healthier than trying to have the IRS as the stand-in for your authority figure that, oh, we got to do this. And it's very clear. People without much in life need to find these authorities to impress and get that gold star. Oh, you need that gold star, don't you?
Well, I think another part of the problem here is this, and I'd be interested in your comments on this. I've sort of refined my way of expressing this as follows: that assuming we're looking at the group of people who are concerned about this, most of them are concerned with solving a problem that affects them rather than the problem, citizenship taxation.
Right.
So, and this is a this inevitably creates a divide and conquer situation because, for example, people who are not in the tax system because they never knew about it, they're concerned with bank account access, for example, right? They don't really care. If their problem's solved, they don't care, everybody else. And then you get people who, are narrowly concerned with, the whole subpart F regime, the guilty, this sort of stuff, PFIX, et cetera, et cetera. So they're concerned with, anything that would solve their problem. They're not willing to commit, or they're not concerned with anything that solves the problem. And for that reason, I think it's very, very difficult, to get people together. And then there's all this, because of the complexity of it, it's very, very hard to get people to see this. So there's all kinds of, general sort of internal squabbling going on. It's a little bit like, if you look at the movie The Titanic with the ship going down and there not being enough lifeboats, right? So we have people scrambling for their own little lifeboat. Oh, I want a FATCA same country exemption, or I want to not have guilty apply to me, or, et cetera. I don't care about everybody else. And there is one group here that nobody cares about, or very rarely. And that I think has been unbelievably and indescribably and unconscionably abused, to bring us back to where this discussion started, the OVDI, and that is the Americans abroad who've tried to be compliant.
Yep.
Nobody cares about them. Oh no. And this is a big part of the problem. And the time has really come to recognize those people as the group that has primarily suffered, which is really, I think, the focus and the theoretical basis of this upcoming CBT lawsuit, right? So I really, I can sympathize, empathize, understand, some combination of those things. the people who are in the system and have suffered particularly because of that. And I don't understand why they're not the focus. I mean, why are the people who are not in the system the focus? You know, this sort of stuff. Right? I just don't get it.
Well, that's a great question. And I think maybe we should just sort of, acknowledge who our actual audience is here. And I think that the fact is that as we discuss more of the problems with the tax code, I can see our views go down. You're absolutely right, Keith. I think as our content gets better and better on this channel, I see our views go down because these people really don't want to know about it. Now, certain people really want to know about it. And I think that's really where our focus is. So look, I'm going to give up on those people because there's nothing they can do to help us. They're so clueless.
Right.
They have no idea what they're walking into. And it's really easy to know what you're walking into. Just take a look at what's going on now. Now magnify that. So all you need to know what's going on now. And maybe this is in people's blind cocoons of what's going on. And we'll be covering some of these cases coming up. Some of these FBAR cases, one that's going to be coming up, we'll be discussing real soon. I just talked to my client's son and on Friday, and he was just, we both beyond what the IRS has done. We are beyond. We can't even. It's hard to walk when you read something that is so false and so illegal, and so ruinous. So ruinous that actually in America today, there is a woman who is at threat of losing her house because her husband didn't file a form indicating he didn't break a crime. Indicating that he didn't break a crime, he didn't do anything wrong, he didn't file that form, and because of that, the government doesn't claim any taxes will do. Doesn't claim because of that, you deserve to lose everything because you didn't file a piece of paper.
But you seem surprised. I mean, this has been going on for years.
I know, right? And I know you're right. Why am I surprised? You're right. I shouldn't be because this stuff was going on for years, and it is going on for years. And so, when it happens to you, and I guess the thing is like when it's, when you see this whole disaster unraveling and where it's going, and unfortunately, when one of the client who has this issue right now hired us in 2014, this is what happened. His previous attorney pushed him into the full OVDI program or the full program, and I would have done a streamlined. And that was the problem right there. I said, oh man, if you only did this instead, we would be done. But because he was the one who says, oh, well, I want to do the most clear thing and do the best taxpayer I could be. And he believed that person. Now his wife may lose her house right now. And we have Mark Zell helping us on that one. And really, and I think this is what we need to do. So if you're watching this, you're clearly one of the people who's, on the right side and you're looking for help. And so that's where I think this would be a good time to John mention your lawsuit.
I'm going to interject for a second. I think we also have another, I think we also have another audience on these podcasts. And those are the Americans overseas who are contemplating whether to enter or not enter the U.S. tax system. And they're listening to try to figure out, what do I do? And I don't know about you guys. You guys are the lawyers, but if it was me and I'm listening to all this, it's the people who are in the U.S. tax system are having the problems.
And so that's what John, right. And that's what John is saying. The real victim here is the people who followed the IRS.
Yeah.
So at this point, can I advise anyone to enter the U.S. tax system? Well, let me tell you it this way. And if you didn't understand what I was saying before, is that in order for the IRS to ruin you, there needs to be a process. They have to have their processes to say, okay, examiner, when you encounter an account like this, ask these questions, get this, and then at the end of this, you get your penalty. That's how you need to know what's coming out. So there's a whole process. So the thing is, how can you not be in that process? There's one way not to be in that process, because if you don't enter the system, this is really what you have to think. How difficult is it for someone to say, oh, you know what? I'm doing nothing today, and this is not one of my job requirements at all, but I think there's someone out in Madagascar who's not in the tax system. Let me go look to see who might be there, right? It's really not going to happen. And there's no way the IRS actually has those resources. The only way to get you into the program is to threaten you with these penalties. And, and that's what they really did to a lot of people. They threatened them with the penalties, and then they hit them with penalties no matter what they did. and now they have people in the tax system that now they can run through their abusive penalty processes that did not exist 10 years ago.
Yeah. So I think it's important to recognize here. I think I'm right in saying this. It's very, very difficult to generalize on the compliance issue, right? The question, I think, is largely what is it they're trying to achieve? And for many people, part of what they're trying to achieve is to move on with their lives and never think about this again, right? Now, whether that involves renunciation, whether it involves just, having some kind of intellectual construct that allows them to deal with this one way or the other. And it's influenced by so many factors, okay? Their net worth, assets in the United States, what would
Right.
comply. I mean, there's an infinite number. And I would personally, as much as, I'm disgusted with this whole system, and I really am. I think that people need to look at their own circumstances and talk it out, talk out their own circumstances, with somebody who is knowledgeable enough to say, well, let's look at it from this point of view, that point of view. I would say also that it is not possible for this group of people who I'm thinking mainly of Americans abroad, but generally it's not possible for this group of people to ever arrive at a solution that's not going to have a degree of anger and resentment or worry, right? I mean, those who don't comply have to deal with the emotional problem of the worry. But those who do comply often will have to deal with permanent residual effects of extreme anger, extreme injustice, et cetera. So, this whole tax system, the administration of it, has really created a system where, for many people, there is no way out that's not going to leave scars. There just isn't. Because no matter what they do, it's the residual effects. There's a great, great trial lawyer, Anthony, in the last century. His name was Mo Levine. And, I don't know if you ever in law school took any course in trial advocacy or whatever, but I mean, he was one of the greatest. And, he was a personal injury lawyer, and he used to close his closing addresses would often end with something like this. It's not what you take from somebody, it's what you leave them with. Okay? It's not what you take from somebody, it's what you leave them with. So, you look at going back to these OVDI programs, these Americans abroad who, turned over a huge percentage of their net worth, the IRS, just because they were, living abroad. And I think probably not the greatest advisors, okay? Oh, by the way, if I can just interject while I had this thought, what people need to understand is they do not have a tax problem at all, okay? The people who are not in the tax system do not have a tax problem. They have a compliance problem, which is a totally different type of issue, But anyway, so these people who entered the system, they might have thought that they were solving their problem. Good. I'll turn this all over. But the residual effects, and I've talked to so many people over the years, the anger, the sense of injustice has so destroyed their lives that were they better? Were they better doing this? I don't know. I mean, that's for them to determine, but make no mistake about it.
Oh, John, you explained it so well. Thank you for expressing that. As someone who's advised people to do this, to say, well, look, if you don't do it, this is the threat, and to take people through it, that I feel a bit of remorse myself for, I was going off the best information I had at the time. And you don't know which one the IRS is going to hit, and they are.
Well, Anthony.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you have that there are people that this process, I think, ultimately though, it just pushes, I can think of a few clients, in particular, I think it pushed them to realize, and I think into an awakening of sorts, to realize, wait a second, if this is true here, then what else is true? And well, probably all that other stuff is true too. That if we know that our IRS is this terrible and is this terrifying, and is this destructive, then what's the rest of our government like? That we know from firsthand experience. There's no question about the IRS has acted as the enemy of the American people of who it can. They didn't act like their friend, didn't act like, hey, let me help you with your compliance. No, it was completely your target. We're coming after you 100%. We don't care. You better lawyer up because we're coming after you 100%. And they actually went after the people who didn't have the lawyers the most.
Lawyers. If you can even find one, you know, with a broad enough perspective, you know, to deal with this kind of problem. But, you know, a couple observations here, okay? Going back to these programs. First of all, and you've commented on this, Anthony, these were not programs created under law. They were programs created under discretion. So for the IRS to say, well, no quiet disclosures, let's unpack that statement. It's saying, do not comply with what the Internal Revenue Code tells you to do.
Yes.
Instead, get down this road where, you know, all we're negotiating about is the penalty. All right. Now, you know, different people may have different views on that, but I think that that's an indisputable fact. Second observation, and this is just an observation, I'm not sure what to infer from that. But if we look at what's going on right now in this whole FBAR stuff, I think FBAR should be seen as a form of the generalized principle of civil forfeiture, is what these penalties should be seen. But what is interesting, so we have Toth, we have Bittner, all right, and there was a case that came down, Flint. Now, what all of these have in common, these are just in the last, you know, recent time. What they all have in common is that each of these people made an attempt to comply with the law, right? Nobody ever contacted them about, you know, well, you know, we think you might have had to file an FBAR and you didn't. My reading of these, if I'm understanding the facts properly, okay, is that in each of these cases, you know, these people filed FBARs, right? And, you know, that was the trigger apparently that led to all the problems. And, you know, I really think there's something fundamentally perverse about a system that presumptively now seems to punish attempts to comply with the law.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you look at those circumstances, now, you know, I may be wrong, and it may be that the IRS had reasons for going after those people. But if you were to look at some of the circumstances here, in the case of Bittner, what a lot of people seem to not realize is that the FBAR penalties, for years, he was not living in the United States. And that, for all those people out there in Facebook and Twitter who say, well, this only applies to homeland Americans, I think that proves they're wrong. Okay, so Bittner is an example. Now, the thing about the Toth case that's interesting is that Ms. Toth never, you know, she inherited this money from her father who did not live in the United States or was gifted it or something like that. And an account was opened, you know, to use a pejorative term, offshore. But this account, I mean, she never opened the account as far as I can tell, right? I mean, it was just one of these things where, you know, it was essentially gifted over to. It was also, you know, chock full of funds that were never subject to U.S. taxation because they were never earned in the United States. And you know, I think that's contextually interesting. And the third one, the Flint case, and I would encourage you to read the court decision on this. This one, I think the IRS has better justification because apparently there were statements made about, you know, lying about, you know, they knew about.
No, I don't believe a damn thing they say. I don't believe the IRS on anything they say.
Well, whatever, you know. But, you know, if you look at these things, right, now, and also the Flint case involved people who were immigrants. And my understanding is that these accounts were in existence before they moved to the United States, right? I mean, this is I don't know. It seems to me that this is worlds away from somebody born in the United States who makes a lot of money outside the United States, opens an account with that money, avoiding the tax, right, by not paying, trying to hide the money from the IRS. Because in those cases, right, notice that, see, okay, if we look at the first three cases, notice that the complaint is, at most, if it's a tax loss, on investment income earned on money on capital that had no connection to the United States, right? So that's what those three cases have in common. That is qualitatively different from a situation where the capital was earned in the United States or earned while the person was a U.S. tax resident. The capital was put in an offshore account for the purpose of hiding it from taxation, from U.S. taxation. And then, of course, not declaring the income from that. That seems to me to be a very, very different type of situation from where they want to impose these penalties right now. So I don't know, but dark clouds rising for sure.
Right. Thank you, John. You know what? We're running out of time. So this is where I want to conclude it. And I might mention this quickly. The Titanic. There's something very interesting about that. Some people believe that there was shenanigans afoot in order to get rid of somebody on that boat called John Jacob Astor for various reasons. Something that most people aren't aware of. The rule, women and children first, was a rule localized to the side of the Titanic John Jacob Astor was on. They were sending out lifeboats that weren't full, and they were only trying to get women and children first. The other side of the boat, you were fine. So actually, the Titanic had more boats than required. But here's the point I'm bringing it up. Many people believe John Jacob Astor needed to go away because he was a vocal opponent of the Federal Reserve and its sister, the Internal Revenue Service. But John Jacob Astor out of the way in 1912. What do you know? In 1913, we have a bunch of things coming in. And as someone who used to not believe any of these things, but now, well, it makes a lot more sense than this case here that we have. I have a case in front of me right now. And a client, I said, well, he was told, like, you better disclose your offshore accounts with the IRS or they're going to hammer you hard. They're going to hammer you so hard. They're going to come after you and hit you with a willful FBAR penalty violation. So you better come clean. Well, in this case, not only did the IRS come after him, he disclosed, not only did the IRS come after him for one willful FBAR penalty, but they did it 6 times. 6 willful FBAR penalties for someone who raised their hands. In this case, and you'll see it, we'll be discussing it more coming up. This case is to collect 2006 to 2012 FBAR penalties that were assessed in September of 2020. If you know that the time to assess an FBAR is only 5 years from the date of a due date, or 6 years, you might ask your question. How did the IRS get to be able to assess these FBAR penalties, 6 of them into 2020 for these years? The answer is because my client consented. My client consented to the extension of time and the thought that the IRS would be reasonable as they decided whether or not to assess FBAR penalties. They went and wildly assessed them. They went so insane beyond my wildest imagination. The IRS has zero credibility with me. This is the thing. This is what's changed. They have zero credibility. They pulled one of the nastiest bait and switches of all time. And it's a hard thing for me to even look at these people as human. It's hard for me to look at any IRS agent as actually human. I just look at them as a programmed robot. I understand that's dangerous, and it's something that I'm praying for all the time. I really can't see these people as people anymore. And that's frightening to me because the IRS has gone after the people who raised their hand the first and said, oh, I did nothing wrong. And so you got to watch it with these people. You got to watch it with these people. And the idea, and last year, I think it was 2 years ago, I had a guest on the show who was complaining that about the U.S. tax system. And she was bragging about how she was volunteering for Joe Biden's campaign. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'm having a hard time with this guest, to be honest. You seem very lovely, but you seem to be completely out to lunch. And you could seem to be on the side of the wrong people. You're on the side of the wrong people, and that's where we're at. So things are going to get interesting. We're going to be, so if you are affected by this, contact John, and I'll give you his website there, where there is a lawsuit that's forthcoming. We're going to be discussing some cases coming up shortly and showing you where it's at. And also, John and I have a very interesting, maybe we could, we might have a podcast coming up on how the FBAR penalties can only be assessed to one person that is not a taxpayer or someone who's filing. And actually, John showed me how the code itself, as terribly written it is completely written the opposite in a way. And we'll be covering that later. So until then, let's keep the faith going. We have a lot of, and I think this is just sort of the reality on the ground, guys. The reality on the ground that we try to convey is that this is not good. This is not good, and people are lulling themselves into a complacency that is insane. We are here warning you. We are telling you this is what's happened the last 11 years. These are all the horrible things that are being destroyed, and you just magnified it. You just magnified the issue in a way you have no idea. And there's not enough lawyers in this world to keep up. There is not enough lawyers in this world to keep up. So you're left with counting on the courts for justice, or maybe you might want to get politically active in a way that's not voting for the same turds that led you to this turd sandwich. With that, this is Anthony Parent for Keith Redmond, John Richardson. Thanks for watching.